back at it with another chess game. This one comes from a Blitz tournament I played. Playing against, it's an under 1500 tournament, but usually with these tournaments what you find is people smurf. People with higher ratings play on lower accounts and pretty good competition. I haven't won one yet, but one day. Anyway, I'm playing this game against a lower rated opponent, so I'm not sure if he's smurfing or not, but I don't think so, just of how this game goes. But it's a nice demonstration of the Black Lion. So he opens with e4, and I do the traditional Black Lion response with pawn to d6. And so with a passive opening by black, naturally white will want to grab more space in the center, which is exactly what he does. He grabs more space with pawn to d4. And so I take it slow. I develop my knight to d7. Usually you want to develop your knight to g6, but if he pushes his pawn and pushes me back, it's just something that I didn't really feel like I wanted to go into. So I play in the Black Lion a little out of order. But as you'll see, I make good work of it. So he grabs even more space in the middle, and I push the e5, looking to contest to see if he's gonna trade out with me or what we're gonna do here. He elects to push his pawn forward, and I then feel safe to bring my G knight into the game. And so at this point, I'm looking to see if he wants to castle kingside, as the Black Lion is a really strong kingside attack, as you're basically shuffling all of your pieces over to the kingside. So I see him develop his knight to c3. I say that looks like a natural move. He's probably just thinking about developing, so I decide to do the same with my bishop, just moving it out so that I can work on rotating my pieces. He continues developing. I push on the left side. I like this h6 move because it prevents the bishop from coming down and sitting right next to your knight on f6. If you were to plant his bishop on g5 and trade out, I think it's actually, even though you're giving up the bishop pair, I think it's actually better for him in this variation. Anyway, he tries to contest me in the center. I just ignore it, moving my knight around, and he pushes forward. And at this point, I think to myself, should I step up to g6 or g5 with my pawn? And ultimately, I decide that, in a blitz game, he's probably just going to take it just for sake. I think if he elects not to take it, it would be better here. But he takes via en passant, and I continue developing in the Black Lion. And it looks like I'm going to have a pretty good setup. Now, if I were white here, I would develop my bishop on the c-file and my queen and look to castle queenside. That's probably your best hope versus the Black Lion, as I have 3 minor pieces on the king side of the board. So castling kingside is essentially suicide, and luckily for me, he doesn't see this coming. So he develops his knight. I continue pushing. I put my knight in his enemy territory, looking to take away his bishop pair. He trades, so I essentially get what I wanted. I wanted to take away his bishop pair, but luckily for me, he just takes my knight and plants me a strong pawn on the f-file. It's not really under attack either, as he doesn't really have any pieces that can contest it. And this is probably the worst move of the game for him. By castling kingside, it gives me a clear direction, as all my pieces you see are just going to flow to the left side of the board. So I move rook to g8. I like this move because I'm immediately planning on taking advantage of this pin, as you'll see in the upcoming moves. He moves his knight to the center of the board, which I don't necessarily think is a great idea. I think his knight is pretty essential in the defense of his king. But basically, you're going to see this a lot in chess. People are just moving their pieces to what they think are good squares, but I immediately attack, placing a lot of pressure on the g2 square. He elects to defend it. I bring my horse, and this is an interesting move. By moving my horse here, I threaten to take the rook. And now you might be thinking, well, aren't you just blundering your pieces? Because after pawn takes bishop, and then knight takes rook, king takes knight, You would say, well, you just traded two of your minor pieces for his rook and a pawn. Is that worth it? But if he were to play pawn takes bishop, you have the nasty discovery of uh, knight to e3, threatening the queen and putting the king in check, forcing the king to move and picking up the queen. So white sees this and he knows that he can't just take the bishop, so he moves his rook. To which I attack the queen anyways, saying, if you want to go down a piece, that's fine with me. He moves his queen and puts me in check. And in this position, I decide not to block with the c-pawn, as it would break open that defense. He has his pawn on d5, and if I were to push that c-pawn, he could take, and it's just uncertain. And so I decide to move the king over. He moved his queen farther away from the defense of his king, which is what I wanted in this attack. And then he moves his rook back. The next move, I decide to get rid of that pawn altogether, and I'm looking to bring my queen into action. So after captures, he brings the rook over to help defend. It's still not going to help him though, as I move my bishop over to the h-file, preparing to bring the queen to g5. And then after he attacks my bishop, I ignore it, knowing that my threat of checkmate is almost imminent now. He decides to run, getting away from the discovery. I put him in check. He elects not to take again, which is the wrong decision, and he moves up. Now, queen to g2 is checkmate in 3, or checkmate in 2. There's really nothing he can do. At this point, he just resigned the game. He can't move down. He can't go to e1 or d1, as the bishop and knight are both walling the king off, so the king can't move to the F, E, or D file on the first rank, and he's in check. So yeah, the only thing he could do is block with his rook, but then you could just capture the rook with your queen and it's still checkmate. Really good game. Really shows how the black lion is excellent at attacking the king's side, and how you can take advantage of someone who doesn't know how to defend against it. So hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time.